I think with all of the horrible things going on in the world, I catch myself feeling like I'm not allowed to feel joy. That somehow it runs against the truth of it all. And I'm having to remind myself that the people who are telling us this, the higher ups who are making the rules, they don't feel any kind of guilt. They profit off of our guilt. So I'm allowing myself to be in spaces that make me happy, to do things that make me happy and joyful, while also not taking my eyes off what's happening.
From Loblolly Press, this is In Conversation. I'm Andrew Mack, and this is our first episode of the year. We took November and December off to reflect, reset, and get clear on what we want this show to hold. Now, we're back with periodic episodes every few months, featuring interviews with writers from the South, as well as their poems and some of their stories. Today, I'm really excited to be talking with Willie Carver Jr. We actually set this interview up back, I think, all the way back in October, and we're getting to it now. Willie Carver Jr. is a youth advocate. He was the Kentucky Teacher of the Year and the author of Gay Poems for Red States. Willie writes and speaks from inside Appalachia with a clear focus on LGBTQ+ youth and the conditions that shape what kids get to learn, read, and survive. In this conversation, he talks about joy without guilt and why he treats care for other people as a daily practice, not a slogan. We also talk about Tore All to Pieces, his fragmented novel built from linked stories and voices arriving in March from the University Press of Kentucky. Here's Willie Carver Jr.
For me, it's about proximity or observation. I know one of the things I do, it's funny. I was actually at the American Federation of Teachers LGBTQ task force. There's about 15 of us, and we're from all over the country. And one of the questions we had was like, what is the gay thing that annoys you? Like the thing that all gay. And one of the, like, people were saying things like, I hate rainbows. Like they're ugly. Mine was like, I hate being told to like have joy, queer joy. The phrase bothers me. I feel like I can't just like sit and enjoy a coffee. Like I need to be smiling and dancing or something. But when those, I try my best not to identify with it. When I feel myself having the thought that I need to feel guilty or I need to feel anything really, I just imagine myself 10 feet above myself and I watch myself until I become something else in terms of vantage point. That helps a lot. I also take from the Dalai Lama the idea that it's impossible to feel bad about yourself if you're worried about other people. I think concern for other people, to me, doesn't feel gloomy. It feels loving. And so if I can sort of shift how we're looking at what's happening in the world into how can I love, then I feel loving, I feel loved, I feel warm. That's what I try to do. And writing is a part of that. It's a major part of that.
Yeah, it puts us in community and in conversation, I think. So when I sit down to write my books or my poems or whatever, I always feel like I'm having that conversation, like, with the writers that I like, you know?
I agree entirely. I was in a very, when I wrote Tore All to Pieces, there are nods to, so this is the surface level version of that. Like, I also think like there are deep rivers of story that we're all standing in at the same time. We feel it and we want to be a part of it with each other. Or we just naturally are writing about what's pulling at our skin, pulling from under our skin. But even on the surface level, when I was writing Tore All to Pieces, I could feel Robert Guy. I could feel his love for people. I could feel his love for language, his belief in the dignity of people. And so I couldn't help but drop little Easter eggs. I've got characters from Kaner County, usually no good men, who are just, hinted at in a waft of moment. And he's got a new collection or a new book he's working on. And I got to read the first 11 chapters of it. And it's gorgeous. It is gorgeous. I thought that he had found a crescendo with Pop, but no. Um, and there were little moments that were nodding back to Gay Poems for Its States. He had characters. He had someone say the truth will stand when the world's on fire. Uh, had someone say they were tore all to pieces. And yeah, I think that's the sort of little surface bump, showing you what's happening down deeper. But I feel the same.
How does that feel when you see now yourself in other writers' work?
I don't I don't know how to feel about it. I actually all of the writer stuff I don't know how to feel at all. I don't know if we can process it. Like I want to say like I see someone reading my book in public or someone stops me in public and like I actually don't know how to feel because it's entirely too big. It's like I don't know. It's like suddenly being transplanted in another country in another time period. Like it's such a big thing that I'm just focused on the like thing right in front of me. Um,
Can you tell like our listeners your story? Like what's your, because I've read about you and I'm familiar with you, but knowing that you kind of had this really big moment where suddenly you were right at the front of a lot of press, like a lot of it in a very conflicting time. Like what was that like and what happened?
I was, um, so I was named the Kentucky Teacher of the Year, which was, I was not,
Congrats.
thank you. It was a beautiful moment. I would not have imagined myself being the Kentucky or the teacher of the hallway in my school because the relationship that I had with authorities in that school were pretty negative because I felt constantly on the defense of my students who were queer, who were brown, who were black, and we live in America in a post 2016 world where there are always going to be voices in the community trying to harm queer kids, black kids, brown kids, and there are always going to be school districts. I don't even think necessarily that want to harm kids, but that would rather make those voices shut up than do the right thing. So it was a shock to be nominated. I thought it was a joke. I actually thought I was getting spam because I kept getting these emails saying, "You're a teacher winner." And then the Department of Education called and said, "Are you going to respond to this?" And so my students found out and made fun of me the way they do because they're high school students when I misspell weapon, which I still can't spell on the board. And one of them goes, "Teacher of the Year here, folks." And they were all laughing. And then another kid goes, "Yeah, like they're going to let some big gay hillbilly be Teacher of the Year." And we all laughed because we all were thinking the same thing. They'll pick somebody from Lexington or Louisville. And then I was in the top 20, and then I was in the top 9, and I kept thinking, "Oh, it'll look pretty, right? They've got rainbow glasses in the picture," and then they named me. And I think that happened because when that student said that, like they're going to pick some big gay teacher of the year, it was a big gay student, and I kept thinking about how they were already telling themselves this story that they couldn't win. They were already using humor. So I pretended with those students, like, "Oh, we're going to win this. This is going to happen." And so I said to them, like, "What do you want to show the state?" And I let them help me write the question, write the answers. I let them show off their work. And so that ended up, I think it was their work that got me chosen. And when it happened, suddenly in the middle of the culture war, there is a teacher saying the words black, brown, and queer student over and over and over. There was not a moment when I spoke when I didn't talk about it because I was also asked to pick a special project, and my special project was unerasing children. So that caused a group of people in my community who, interestingly enough, didn't even have kids in the community or didn't have kids in the school to start a campaign. I tried to ignore it. They would go to board meetings. I don't need to say what they said. Everyone knows what they said. If there's a gay teacher, we know, right? Then they went after me on social media, would just fabricate nonsense because you can say whatever you want. And when I got lawyers. They said, don't speak, don't say anything. And that's what I chose to do. And then they started going after my former students. And that's when I realized that this is untenable, this whole situation. And when I left the classroom, and that's why it was the middle of my teacher of the year, um, I was asked to testify before Congress, because I did speak out on social media about some of the issues that were happening. Jamie Raskin became aware of it, and I testified before Congress while still working at my school. I testified. uh, So long story short, when I quit, I was like, okay, we've had the Congress moment. We've had, you know, tens of thousands of people call me pretty disgusting things. I've had state representatives call me disgusting things for daring say that these kids should be able to read books, that these kids should see themselves in history. Um, and I decided to make the post when I left teaching friends only, but forgot that I had a journalist on the friends list. And I'm not saying that journalist did anything wrong by writing a story, but 3 days later, a friend in Australia sent me a little note that said, "Hey, you were in the Sydney Morning Tribune." You know, and a little link story, but it was there. And yeah, it was a very big moment where suddenly the entire country seemed angry at. There was a concerted effort to go after teachers, to go after queer people, to go after queer teachers, and I was sort of to talk about queer youth, and I was sort of there in the forefront.
Talk about talk about so much like uh stuff taken at one time. It's not that like you explode on the scene for this like really positive thing and then everybody's so supportive of you because of it. It was like exactly what they've been doing to queer folks for years and years and years and years. It's like not a new phenomenon, and it is still when I hear you talk about it, I'm angry, like disgruntled. I'm like, you really took your disgruntlement all the way to Congress, you know? Like I want to do that. Like I'm ready to do that for you, you know?
It, it was a beautiful moment. That whole thing happened because I had 200 followers on Twitter at the time, and I left to meet the president. And in that moment, I left a day early because I wanted to just have a quiet, calm day to myself. And the only other queer person in my apartment wrote me and said they suspended me. And I was like, what happened? And she said, I had a TikTok that had a cuss word in it. And I wouldn't even go to the details, aren't even important. What is important is I was like, I can't leave. I can't get far away enough. And I can't exist in both of these realities. There's one reality where I'm meeting the president, and there's another one where I have people watching my every move. And if anything that I do can in any way be interpreted as problematic, I'm facing a 10-day suspension, where I can't leave my friend without feeling guilty. And I wrote something like small, like I was just exhausted. And I had at that time been doing queer positivity and queer joy, but I said, I'm the teacher of the year. I'm so tired of this. I'm sorry. I don't know if I can do it. And I went to sleep, and then I woke up and 40,000 people had responded to that. And that was the real big lesson. It was that people will come to you when you're in. There are good people out there. There are lots of good people, and it shifted what I understood advocacy to be. To me now, advocacy is a belief in other people. It's going back to the real roots of that word, advocate, to call out, and believe, hopefully, that other people will respond. And then everything I've done since that moment, people have responded. I think people are desperate. I mean, you were just saying, like, people want to. So when my students, they won a $10,000 grant from the It's Better Project. And among the things that they wanted to do was buy books by underrepresented people for their library, because these kids did research. They were worried about their classmates who had mental health issues. They were worried about suicidality in their classmates. So they did research and discovered that the easiest tier of someone's life was access to media. That's the easiest tier to shift. So they made a video, they won this grant, and 100% of their books were rejected by their school district. Um, we even offered, we sent an email early on and said, here are all the titles. If you have any issues, let us know. We can switch the titles out. We worked with a specialist in curriculum to come up with a list of books. But when I realized we have to do something with these books, I just asked the community in a little GoFundMe. First, where can we put them? And a local art center said, oh, we would love to have a library. So we decided to call it the Rainbow Freedom Library. And we just asked for $400 so that if a kid who wasn't downtown wanted a book, we could have postage. That's all. That was the idea. We got like $5,000 in a week. People were like that, excited to help these kids. And that's been my experience with everything. People want to help.
Yeah. I'm interested that okay, what's the Latin word he used? Can you say it? Was it
advocate? So like, because Latin has like 5 words for calling, but vocate, it's about voice. It's not using names. It's not any, it's calling to someone.
It triggered for me the idea of vocation and how your vocation has seemed to evolve and change over time as the world around you has changed. And that's not to say that you've been passive in any of that. You've been very active in developing that. And I'm wondering how your relationship to vocation has changed, like for yourself, how you see it since that moment, but also even before that. I'm curious how you became a teacher. Like, where did that come from?
I believe I'm not going to be the pretentious person who quotes Nietzsche.
You better do it. You better
But he
do it.
talks about the spiritualization of an idea, when you take a concept and make it so high and holy, it becomes something. And maybe it's a circle, maybe it's not a lifting, but kindergarten is why I became a teacher. Because I have really hardworking parents. They're still hardworking. They've worked every day of their lives. Hard work is not enough in America. That will not secure you. So we had bouts of pretty extreme poverty. No electricity, no running water, no food in the house, homelessness. School always had all of the things that we didn't have. It felt to me, it might as well have been magical. There was always food there. There was always heat there. There was always running water there. So for that reason alone, it felt like a magical place, and I loved being there. And then I can still close my eyes and picture my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. King, sitting on a stool in front of us. And there we were, 20 kids in a floor who did not know the letter B. And, she said some words, she moved her hands, and we all learned it. She saw what we weren't yet. And as far as I'm concerned, did a magic spell to change us. I wanted to be a part of that. And so it was never a question. I was the first in my family to go to college. I have more than 100 cousins, first cousins. No one knew how it would work, but I wouldn't stop until it happened. Because it was such an important thing for me. But I realized really quickly, once I did get the license and get in the classroom, that teaching French and English, while very, very important, were not my primary reason. Because once you enter a system and realize the system is hurting kids, you have to keep those kids from being hurt, and you have to defend them.
I sense that with kind of how you were talking about even the nomination for Teacher of the Year, and then having your students participate in that. It's like not about you being the English teacher. It's really about how you're supporting them.
Absolutely. I think in pictures, and like the picture I had through most of my time in education was like, I'm in the mud with these kids and I'm trying desperately like to hold them out of the mud long enough to get them across this pit that we're in. And that was it. I would put on my shield every day and go, and try my best to argue their rights. So I became really good at understanding the law um, because I had to. And I think once I left, that symbol shifted. It was actually a student. I was speaking at a high school in Fayette County, and there were probably 300 kids in there. It was a really, really big assembly of every LGBTQ group in the entire county that had come. And this kid was like, "Isn't it kind of cool though? You left the classroom and now you get to talk to students like more than ever." And I hadn't really thought of it like that. So I think one, holy cool kid, but my image now is like, why does this mud exist? Why do we have to have the mud in the first place? So maybe I can have the classroom out in the sunlight and maybe start drying some of it up.
Yeah, I mean, one piece of that is your writing, right? And one piece of that is your advocacy work that you're doing. Like, I think that's all part of the puzzle. I know that like you're right in the middle of launching a new book. Um, tell me about tell me about Tore All to Pieces.
I'm so excited about Toro Pieces. I am. Don't forgive the pun. I'm tore all to pieces about it.
Yeah.
Oh,
For my
it
non-Southern listeners, you're gonna have to explain what Tore All to Pieces is.
tore all to pieces is Appalachian, perhaps Southern, and it can be used for anything. My husband had a colleague, and she used this phrase like every 20 minutes. But tore all to pieces can be excited, can be absolutely devastated, but it's a heightened state of emotionality um, that rips at your sense of self. Yeah, like, well, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm tore all pieces. She don't get over here by 8 o'clock.
That's right. How much of your Southern accent did they try to train out of you when you were becoming a teacher?
I mean, there are whole poems and gay poems Fred states about it. I just refused. Uh, I was lucky enough to be doing French linguistics beside of it. And if you really want to see people's yeah, ignorance is the right word. Ignorance of people who don't understand how accents work and who just assume that we're all stupid. I bet you I have had 100 non-Southern accented people in my life say, "Wow, what must your French sound like?" And I always get to say, like, "Do you think your accent more naturally translates into French? Why's that? That's so interesting." Why do you like? Do you really think a standard American accent speaking French sounds good in French? Um, but yeah, they definitely tried, and I never let that bother me. And luckily did my student teaching where it wouldn't matter. And I was ferocious. I've always been ferocious about grammar protection. And maybe off-puttingly so, because I think a lot of people they've never encountered the thought. And here, I will be honest, I think it's often progressive, identified people who think that they're very open-minded, who have never once given a thought to how they destroy people's culture linguistically with the way they approach language. Um, and so I bite really hard, really fast, and they never mention it again.
I love that. I mean, I often think about I moved north for quite a while for work, and coming back was a necessity for me. I needed to be here again. I'm originally from South Carolina at Columbia, but moved back to be here in Asheville. And being a part of Appalachia and hearing the accents and hearing my accent play off of their accent, like there is something lost when we start to. It's a way of thinking that we end up losing. I mean, it even tore all to pieces. A lot of my northern friends or colleagues will comment on like the kind of storytelling nature of the southern accent, that things are exaggerated and things have more drama to them. And that's just part of who we are. That's part of how we tell our stories. The tore all to pieces doesn't always mean I'm actually tore all to pieces, you know?
I had some, I had a colleague in Vermont who would ask me to repeat something, and in a very sweet way, would say like, "That's such an interesting idiom," and I would be like, "Oh, that's not an idiom. We just speak in high metaphor. Like, he's slicker than chocolate." And she'd be like, "Oh, wow, what does that mean?" I'm like, "It means what it means. It means slicker than chocolate. That is not an expression. I just said it because it felt right." But yeah, I think so, and I think Appalachian English, Southern English, they lend themselves to a lot of. I'm actually doing a talk with Paul Reed at App Studies about this because the prevailing kind of model says all versions of English are equal, and like that's the progressive model right now. And I'm like, no, they ain't. Because here's what we know linguistically. If a form persists that is non-standard, it's because it's doing something that the standard can't do. That means necessarily Appalachian has to be more complex and more interesting than standard, because Appalachian already subsumes all of the standard English already. So when I say something like you might could put your chairs in this arrangement, that is communicating something that cannot be communicated as easily in regular English.
Might could is a great example. I never want you to use that in a grammar class, but then you go out and you're like, but that's what it means. It's a very, English doesn't suffice to match that.
That one always comes to mind because I had someone who he was a new colleague of mine, and we didn't mesh well very easily. And he was saying, I just wish there was an easier way to cut across my classroom. And I was thinking, if you put a space between the third and fourth desk, that will solve your problem. But it seems such an obvious thing that it seemed rude to say you could do this or you might do this. You might could do this suggests, I assume you already know this and I assume you thought about it, and I'm going to say it out loud to see what you think. Like it has that built-in humility that American English is not interested in at all. Like humility is not its strong suit. And I didn't say anything because I'm like, it doesn't feel natural to say anything other than you might could. Even you might be able to isn't nice. It looks more at power, the capacity. So yeah, I'm totally with you. And they tried, and I will admit, high school senior English, we interviewed for jobs, and only one person could get the job.
This is always when it comes up, right? When they're like,
Yeah.
you have to do the thing for the thing. Yep.
So at the time in Kentucky, we had some really cool legislation that came from a civil court case, from a larger case, sorry, at the end of the 80s called the Rose case. But you could not count off based on someone's grammar in Kentucky, and you actually couldn't impose it in a rubric. So I didn't get this job, and I interviewed for English teacher, and the only person who got the A was the person who got the job. Everyone else had to get a B, or I guess lower. But my English teacher pulled me aside and she goes, I want to be really honest. You wouldn't get the job, and here's why. And she goes, I'm not saying it's fair, but it's real. So she explained to me what a past tense participle was. And I was so anxious freshman year of college that I printed out the whole list so that I wouldn't ever say I've saw or I seen. And now I say it intentionally and put it in books.
That's right. We say intentionally put it in books so we can preserve it, right? Like there's some amount of like, let's just keep it out there. Yeah. How does it show up as you write, and then in what gets published?
So with Gable, with all, I think with all of my poetry, it's there, and I have a hard time pulling it out because it's as much a part of place as anything else. It's as much a part of thinking as anything else. And that doesn't mean every single poem I write has even necessarily a strong Appalachian voice. Some of them do. And I think often the tender ones do. And I've had, especially with Twirl of Pieces, some real issues with even using standard English. So there's a story. It actually began this whole book. I was climbing up Mont Royal, which is in Montreal. It's actually the mountain that the city is named after. And it is an easy walk, but I am not an outdoorsy person. And about halfway up, I had to stop and rest and sit on a bench. And this woman, who was at least 30 years older than me, wearing high heels, just like marches past me mid-conversation. And I was laughing to myself because it was so funny. And I heard in my head the voice of this little girl. So when I was a kid, me and my cousin Jessica was pushing bikes up to the head of the holler. And it was a really steep holler. About halfway up, this little girl standing in front of a trailer barefoot looked at us and goes, and bikes work better when you sit on them. And it was just like pure meanness out of this like 7-year-old kid. And that line has stuck with me. So I heard her say that like in my ear, watching that woman go past. So I had to write a poem, like just remembering that moment. And then like over the next couple of days, that little voice just kept buzzing. It's basically saying like, I'm more than your poem. Like this poem is about you and your experience. I'm bigger than that. So I ended up writing her whole story. And the whole book is tied to this idea because I realized once I sort of brought this character into being, the exact moment that happens in the poem happens in this story. They converge. But I could never pull the little girl from the story and put her in the poem. And I cannot pull the little girl from the poem and put them in the story. The tone, the context, the perspective is so vastly different that they don't really exist in each other's realities. Even though I could say, looking at this, the way the language can work, and say factually, we could imagine that both of them are true. So I was really starting to think a lot about like, what are the limitations of us even saying something that's true? Because even if it is true, that doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean that there's some essential quality that people have that's coming across or not coming across. So in her story, this is a little girl who is facing drug abuse in her parents, who is facing neglect, who is facing trauma, and a really miserable existence. And I had to write her because I had known this girl over and over. And every time I go visit my parents, there are these little kids running around the bottom, and I worry about them. I worry about what their lives are going to be, because I hear stories and know about the sorts of things that they have to see. So when I tried to write this, I couldn't do it in a third person standard accent because it felt voyeuristic. And I just kept thinking, who are you to tell this story? Who is this narrator to get to tell this story? So I was like, all right, I'm going to have a third person omniscient Appalachian. So that's what I did. And it wasn't a character. It wasn't an old man recounting a story, but the voice of God sounds like he's from Floyd County, Kentucky. And it's Appalachian grammar. And what I found was I could tell that story a lot more easily. And even writing in that voice, I had more access. And so there are a few stories, in the book. So it's a novel, but it's told in short stories. And it's non-chronological, atypical. And about 3 or 4 stories have that Appalachian narrator, and he's the most intelligent narrator. He's got the most poetic flourishes. And I noticed that when I love the character and I'm worried about them, that's the narrator that wants to have them.
Yeah, it's a one you want to spend the most time with.
Yeah. And I mean, there were other stories where it felt right to have a different narrator, for a lot of different reasons. But yeah, that's the narrator I'm most interested in right now.
Can you tell us a bit more about how you go from writing poetry and having like a book of poems to then you've encountered this story, a story you know you want to tell, and now you've decided that it's going to be a novel but told in like these kind of vignettes, really shorter stories. Like, how does that feel to write? What are some of the difficulties and challenges of that? How did you come to that decision?
I came to it thanks to Crystal Wilkinson. Crystal Wilkinson is so good at what she does, and she is body and human first, everything else second. Craft is subservient to the human experience for her. And it's almost, I sort of see, for me, poetry, it's like we zoom in so really, really close when we get to poetry. And then when you keep zooming, you actually find yourself back in fiction again. What I mean by that is like, what this book is, it's poems and stories. And it feels almost like the poems are written in a very tiny moment. In reality, for the most part, a lot of these are based on real experiences, but it might be a 10-second experience in my life that I've sort of expounded upon. the meaning of. And then that becomes the sort of nebulous cloud that an entire world is born. So there's a cycle there where that small moment is actually big enough to encapsulate something much bigger. And that really big thing can be encapsulated in something very small. Often poems are doing that very work, right? They're doing what a novel can do in a few words. So I think partly it was discovering that relationship, and partly I just love people. I so desperately love people, and I want to give them space. And fiction is such a cool way to do that. And honestly, the line between the two is really blurry for me in the first place.
Um, to not to change topics too suddenly, but to really drill down on like your like the way that you do really care about the people that you're writing about is that it's really important that the work that's coming out right now about our region, about Appalachia, about queer folk, about the people that we're raised around, like it cannot be a caricature of what people think we are. And when I read your work, being someone that's from here, not from Kentucky, but from here in the South, like I know some of these people. I know Rayanne. Like I know the soft pack cigarettes. Those kinds of things that are coming in. So I just wanted to say that it's not a question, but it's just a delight to read something and feel like you see yourself, you see the people that are around you, and you know that there's so much care being given to the people in these stories. I'll also say like um being able to write in this way is so accessible to um the reader. And I was wondering if that played a role in anything that you were doing. This kind of like poem, short story that kind of like I could sit down for 5 minutes and read it, and put it down and come back and get another one. It's like these little TikTok bites of reading. Did you think about that as you were writing it?
Um, a little, yeah, in a lot of different ways. One is in Gay Poems Fred States, there are these really super short poems that are almost country aphorisms, really. Um, like one is called Mountain Learning, and the entire poem is if you're not learning the hard way, sorry about it, you're not learning them. And I thought about pulling them out. And again, props to Crystal Wilkinson. She was like, absolutely not. She was like, this is an artifact and you need to keep this. You need to keep it exactly as is. So she wouldn't let me pull them. And what I learned from queer youth is that, especially for people who want to engage in culture, but who have not been given the opportunity to read poetry, who do not know how to begin with lit, those were so accessible. And sorry, I met a boy in Athens, Ohio, who told me that he and his friend text those poems to each other. And I had a girl in West Virginia paint them for me. Well, she painted them and then just sent them to me. So they are very accessible. And even the longer poems, especially that book, because that book, it needed to go to kids, and I knew that it was going to end up in the hands of a lot of kids, or I hoped it would. And there were times when the editors would say things like, maybe basically the entire editing process was, what if we just remove these last two lines? Because they were worried it gave too much, that it spelled out the lesson. And I was like, they have to stay. Because when I think about the love I've received in my life, the love that nourished me, people showed me that they loved me and they told me every single time. It wasn't just that my mom would get off 2 shifts of work and then come cook for us. She would cook for us and say, I love you. I love you. Southerners do that. Appalachians do that. And they constantly reinforce it. So I said, I don't want to write poetry that leaves any question. I want someone who reads this to know you're worthy. I want someone who reads this to know you are exactly enough, exactly as you are. Don't walk away confused about it. So it was a thought, and I thought maybe if I can pair stories with poems, it might help some people not be so afraid of poems.
Thanks again to Willie Carver Jr. for joining me today. You can find Gay Poems for Red States wherever you get your books, and his novel Tor Alta Pieces arrives March 2026 from the University Press of Kentucky. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Loblolly Press in Conversation wherever you listen. We release interviews every few months, plus short in-between episodes, where writers read poems and stories in their own voice. Loblolly Press in Conversation is hosted by me, Andrew Mack. Today's guest was Willie Carver Jr., and we produce the episodes here from my home in Asheville, North Carolina. The music in the intro and the outro is Summerstein by Tony Sopiano, and you can find more from Loblolly Press at loblollypress.com and loblollypress.substack.com. Thanks for listening.